A very good evening to one and all. My name is Rakesh Rajiv, and I'm part of the business team at Scion IIT Bombay. And a very warm welcome. And we have a special edition of the Power Hour series. And this is a webinar which we've been doing it since last year. And we have a separate series that we have just started called the Faculty Entrepreneur Series. And through this series, we are trying to showcase different faculty members from across India and from different academic institutions who have taken the leap to entrepreneurship. So I'm very glad to invite Professor Shashikant Suryanarayanan, or Professor Shashi from IIT Bombay, who is also the founder and chairman at Sedimec Mechatronics. And we will also have a conversation with Professor Santosh Garpure, who is professor in charge at Scion IIT Bombay. So welcome to both Professor Shashi and Professor Santosh to this webinar. And I would like to also warmly welcome all the attendees who have joined us from different parts of India today. And I will just quickly, in few words, explain. Most of you know what we do at Scion. We are the technology business incubator at IIT Bombay. And over the last 17 years, we have incubated 185 startups, of which 53 startups are currently incubated with us. And we have invested close to more than 25 crores in the different startups that we have incubated. And the combined valuation of a portfolio of 185 companies is more than 18,000 crore, or close to 2.5 billion. And a very interesting metric here: for every rupee that Scion has invested, our startups have went on and raised 174x of that initial funding that we provided. And we have close to 200 IPs being generated, and 41 IPs have been generated from within IIT Bombay itself. So, it's a very happy that we have a very special series that we are starting, and our support come from IIT Bombay. And I would like to tell the attendees today that we will have two halves of the webinar. In the first half of the webinar, we'll have Professor Shashi, who will be sharing his journey from lab to startup and scale up in terms of his journey with Sedimec. And in the second half, we will have Professor Garpure in conversation with Professor Shashi. And we would also like to ask the audience also to put their question and answers in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Try not to put it in chat. So if it is in Q&A, it'll be easy for us to kind of sort out and ask these questions to these speakers. And I'll quickly introduce both the speakers. I'll start with Professor Shashi. Professor Shashikant earned his BTech from IIT Madras in 1998 and a PhD from the University of California in Berkeley in 2002. His technical area of interest has been control technologies, primarily for automotive applications. Shashikant joined the faculty at IIT Bombay in 2004 and continues to serve here at IIT Bombay. In 2007-2008, he co-founded Sedimec Mechatronics along with three of his students who were students at that time, and then follow on which he incubated here with us at Scion. And his vision was to build fresh control technologies that see widespread use. And Sedimec's technologies are now being used in more than 30 million two-wheelers and 5 lakh generators. The company's technology typically are embedded into controllers that are manufactured in the millions per year and in its own manufacturing facilities in Pune. Given the prospects of creating a larger enterprise, Sedimec has attracted equity investments from venture capital firms such as Nexus, TR Capital, Iron Pillar, Montaigne, and from Nandan Nilekani in his personal capacity. Welcome, Professor Shashi.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to invite Professor Garpure. He is professor in charge at Scion and also a perfumery chair professor at the Department of Chemistry in IIT Bombay. Professor Santosh Garpure graduated with an MSc degree in 1996 from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and he obtained his PhD from IISc Bangalore. Currently, he holds the position of perfumery chair professor. And as I said, he's also professor in charge at Scion. He's also working on problems relevant to industries from different domains. IIT Bombay conferred on him the Excellence in Teaching Award in the year 2015 and Departmental Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2019. He is a member of the International Advisory Board of European Journal of Organic Chemistry. He is a fellow of Royal Society of Chemistry. And very recently, he was awarded INSA Teachers Award 2021 by Indian National Science Academy, New Delhi. Welcome, Professor Santosh.
Thanks, Rakesh.
Right. So as I mentioned, we'll have the webinar in two halves. In the first half, we'll have Professor Shashi, who would be speaking about his journey from lab to startup and his journey with Celimac Mechatronics. And in the second half, we'll have Professors Santosh and Professor Shashi in conversation. So I leave the floor open to Professor Shashi. So, sir, if you could take over, and probably you can share the screen with the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Rakesh. First of all, my presentation would be to just give you a glimpse of the state of the company I founded, not so much the journey. The journey would be more around the discussion that I will have with Professor Santosh Gharpure, which will touch upon the key aspects. But first of all, what is this company, and what are some of the key points around which we can have a few discussions. Okay, so I'll give you a sense of that. Are you able to see the first screen?
Yeah.
Of the picture of the SMT line?
Yes, SMT line is visible.
Okay, yeah, all right. So this is what is called a controls company. Okay, so first of all, because the audience would be varied, what is meant by a controls company? You need to have a little bit of a sense for that. So control systems are organization of a few elements which allow you to achieve a certain objective. So for example, if you want to catch a ball, there is a control system in place which works as follows. Your eyes track the ball, that's the sensor, give information to the brain. The brain is what is called the controller. The brain decides which way your hands have to move, and the hands are the physical things that are actually moving. So hands are called actuators, and the ball is what you're catching, whose behavior you cannot control much, right? It behaves as it desires based on the physics of the system in question. So these elements of sensor, controller, actuator, and the physical system that you're controlling interact with each other in every control system. Okay, and what this company does is design novel control systems for certain class of applications highly relevant to automotive primarily, right? And what sort of things does it do? Right? One of its flagship products right now is a motor controller. So why is a motor controller required? For electric vehicles, of course, every electric vehicle requires a motor controller, otherwise the vehicle will not move. But for IC engine vehicles also, this motor controller is primarily used as a starter generator, okay, both for starting the vehicle as well as once the vehicle is started to generate electricity out of it. A single controller does that job of power flow in both directions. Okay, so I do not know how much sense this very brief introduction made to you, but more importantly, the brain of today's control systems, right, looks something like this person holding in their hand. Okay, the internals of this brain, for you to have some sort of image of how this looks like, you can think of it as a motherboard of a PC. Some green PCB substrate on which electronic components are mounted, and there is a microprocessor with code inside. I'll give you a picture of that. Yeah, something like this. I hope you're able to see it, right? So this is the sort of internal structure of the controllers that we sell. So this company manufactures these controllers in large numbers and sells to major two-wheeler manufacturers, generator manufacturers, off-highway powertrain manufacturers, etc. Okay. Crucially, the company is not about just manufacturing, but mainly about building the control technologies that allow you to combine combinations of sensing, actuation, as well as the control algorithms in a novel fashion in order to accomplish a certain task. Okay. So this is a picture from our SMT lines. There's high volume lines in which millions of controllers are made. Just to give you a sense of what our manufacturing setup looks like. So we are a controls company that focuses on motor and engine controls. Okay, so that's what we are. Our origin, like Rakesh mentioned, was in an IIT Bombay lab. Back in 2007, 2008 was when the company was formed. But between 2004 and 2008, the work done as part of my lab formed the basis for the creation of this company, and also happened to be the seed for the first technology the company built. Back between 2008 and 2010, it was actively working on a technology building exercise. So today the company is about 300 crores in revenue. Has about, so we started with 20 lakhs or so in the first year or two of our, so we have grown more than 1500 times in the last 10, 12 years of existence. But the more crucial thing, of course, we are growing and we'll probably be a 700 or 1,000 crore company in the years to come. The more crucial thing is that it has been able to establish some leadership positions. Okay. One of that is that we are the first company or first group of engineers anywhere in the world that has successfully enabled what is called sensorless commutation. Commutation is a process in electric machines where you excite stator windings depending on the position of the rotor. Some of you who are electrical engineers would know that. Sensorless commutations for application that require high torques at low speed. Okay, so the people who are familiar with the physics of electric machines, there is an idea called back EMF, phenomenon called back EMF, which is proportional to the speed at which the rotor is rotating, and that back EMF happens to be zero at zero speeds. Okay, so knowing the position of the electric machine, rotor of the electric machine with respect to the stator at zero or low speeds needs to exploit some other physics. Okay, so we estimate, so we do what is called reluctance tracking, estimate reluctance in real time as a function of position, and utilize that to get an idea of where the rotor is with respect to the stator without the need for physical sensors. So the first entity to have managed this for high torque, low speed situations anywhere in the world, this has nothing to do with India, is ZMAC, this company. Okay, so it has done some first in the world sort of technology building around known physics. We are still talking about electromagnetism, but working through all the various technological and engineering challenges to do that reliably in a wide variety of situations, etc., which have been worked out. So it's able to build such control leadership positions. The company has about 120, 130 engineers who form the core of what gets built. About 25, 30 of them have masters and PhD sort of degrees. Out of 120 or around 45 or 50 will have degrees from the IITs and a couple from the NITs, but IIT Bombay and IIT Madras, there are quite a few employees who did their bachelor's and DD programs there. The company manufactures about 3 million controllers a year today. More than 1 million of them are around motor and engine controllers. Okay, and that is also the primary source of the revenue. We also make smaller controllers for serving the various customers that we have around battery management, voltage regulators. Okay, so our business, I think I've already mentioned, is to conceive control technologies and seek partners for large volume deployment. So our partners today tend to be major two-wheeler companies who buy these controllers from us. Okay, so from our facilities, we ship these controllers, which are embedded with our control technologies. We carry the control technologies first to them, for them to have a look, and then test it after elaborate testing, various situations, etc., which runs for several years. If they are interested in deploying it, then we are there, both from a complete offering perspective, not just the idea of the technology and the engineering behind it, but also all the way towards manufacturing these controllers in very large numbers, managing the supply chain, and delivering physical products that they can buy. So we basically do part supply to these major companies. So each of these companies is a $1 billion plus company, and we tend to have very large accounts with each of them. So because we are a fundamental technology company, we will only sell into other companies who can sort of understand our technology or use our technology, which is not the end users. No end user understands what motor commutation is, but engineers in several of the companies that we sell into do understand it. So our customers tend to be these large OEMs, as they may call it, which are vehicle manufacturers or generator manufacturers, but also large companies like Bosch or Continental, etc., who also have the ability to understand motor controls. Okay, so that is what we are doing as a company. I mentioned to you, we have a proven history of large volume deployment of control technologies we have built on our own. The first one of them was actually seated in my lab, which then finally went on 3 crore vehicles. It's a very large number of vehicles. In fact, over a period of 6 to 7 years, starting from 2012 to 2019, 2020, we hit 2 crore vehicles or 20 million vehicles in India. 2 of the major manufacturers, TVS and Bajaj, deployed it on every single model of their vehicles, whether it is a Pulsar or the Jupiter or the Moped or CT100 or whatever you may think of. And also another manufacturer, Hero, also deployed it on 3 or 4 models. That was a very successful technology adoption story. I don't think there is any parallel to that yet in the Indian ecosystem of something having originated in an IIT lab, where the lab played a critical role in the first elements of the technology building. And then, of course, it was honed and engineered to the point where it is deployable within the company. We are also in the generator market. It's a very different market to two-wheelers, where we again sell physical controllers. We are today largest in India by a very large distance as a generator controls company, and we are number 2 by volume globally already. Okay, so the generator business globally is about 2 million units of diesel generators per year, and today we supply between 150,000 to 175,000. So little more than you can say 8 or 10% of the entire generator market, out of which maybe the addressable market is close to about 800,000 to 1 million. Okay, so we are already in the 15-20% sort of space by volume. By revenues, we are maybe 6th or 7th because we don't serve the larger generator segment. So that's the story about this company, ability to build fresh control technologies and see large volume deployment. I've already spoken to you about the motor control bit. Okay. Now this company is unique in India. This slide is particularly important. The right-hand part of the slide, which is about manufacturing, that a lot of decent Indian companies can do. Even that, not a whole lot of companies can build world-class facilities or have the desire to build world-class facilities. We do have world-class manufacturing lines, but that several companies have done in India. The middle bit is taking known technologies and building robust products around it. That is done by much fewer companies. In fact, not a whole lot of companies you can count by hand in India. Okay. And the left bit, where you build the technology itself first. That is done, as far as we have seen, in the automotive space, etc., only by us as an Indian company. So we compete with the likes of Bosch or Denso. Bosch is from Germany, Denso is from Japan, Continental is from Germany. So these are the companies which have traditionally done this in the automotive world, build fresh technologies and take it to the customers. So we are unique in the sense of, because of the left-hand side of this, this picture, being able to develop fresh technology and build robust products and build those products in high volume manufacturing lines and supply and at good quality numbers. So that's a little bit about the company itself. Anybody has a few questions about the company, on what state it is, what it does? I'm happy to take that. Poini, if you are handling the questions on this thing, you can pose something to me, or we can move on to the question answer session, more around the journey and the thoughts behind lab to market, etc.
So, Shashi, what we propose is that we can go ahead with the journey and we can take all the questions combined together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So what I suggest is that can we go on basically conversation with Santosh first and then we take all the questions together?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Santosh, what do you?
Yeah, Shashi, very, very interesting bit to know about your company. First time I'm hearing details of, about the company. And I must tell you what I was thinking in my head is why I was thinking of having this series with our team. Coming from research background, you know that we write a lot of introductions of our papers, right? Ye karenge, wo karenge. I mean, if we solve this problem, it will change the world, right? I mean, that kind of an introduction we write. Here, why I got goosebumps while listening to you is, here is a colleague of mine who has done something which actually has translated that introduction of a paper which claims a lot into real life. So that is something which was quite amazing. And I think that's the whole motivation of this conversation, as far as I'm concerned, that we need to understand these kind of stories where, how the journeys happen. And that is what I want to start with the first question. How was your journey from being faculty member of IIT to the full-fledged entrepreneur, creating a company which is world leader with the technology which is first of a kind?
Yeah. So first of all, the journey of entrepreneurship is not for all faculty, and it's for an obvious reason. But I will just lay it out, and that will tell you a little bit about the mentality required for the journey. See, a typical faculty member in an educational institution like the IITs, they are driven by, most of them, I'm not saying everybody, they're driven by primarily two things. One is that they want recognition within their community. Okay, so their community is actually other faculty members, other researchers. So at the very top, if you have physicists, you want, in the Nobel Prize is the biggest thing, right? So it's a recognition that you are a creative person by other people who understand this esoteric stuff. So you want recognition. Then at the lowest end is the recognition that I will get a promotion and I will become a dean, or I will become a director, or whatever it is. That is I would say at the other end of the sort of recognition. But that's something that faculty members typically want. They want recognition from other peers and people who they regard as good in terms of intellectuals, to say that they are good. Okay. In the context of IITs and even in academic institutes abroad, the other thing that they typically want is a little bit more money than their salaries offer them. Okay, so this is the reality of what people in IITs or other places want. Of course, a few people may not be interested in any of this. They may just be doing stuff for the love of the science or the engineering that they are pursuing. But I would say that a large section of faculty actually fall into this characterization that I've just described. Now, this is actually very different from the mental makeup of an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur in general, and an entrepreneur coming out of a faculty sort of setup where your technical strength, right? So what is a faculty entrepreneur, right? The technical strength, you have to have a fundamental belief that your technical strength could lead to creation of technologies and products that a very large number of people can use. Okay. So in this belief itself, you can see that there is no aspect of peers of mine, recognition with them or anything like that. This has nothing to do with that. Okay. So in fact, I don't think any of my peers know anything about my company at all, and not that they're bothered either. So I am not doing this for recognition amongst peers. I don't want to tell other mechanical engineers in my department or outside in other big universities or anything that I'm good or anything like that and get papers and recognition. That's not the aim at all. The real belief is that my understanding of control can lead to the creation of technologies which are deployed in a mass scale. Okay, that is what I started off with. That's always been the case. Obviously, you cannot build everything yourself. You may have certain ideas, but in my case, I think the initial set of students that I worked with, fantastic engineers. Some of them are on par with the best in the world. They have gone about creating a large part of the technologies that the company benefits from today. And of course, I would say that I am the seed of it in some sense because of the outlook to control technologies, as well as the thoughts around the first set of technologies as well. But the key thing that I think was, for me, the mental makeup is around large numbers of people adopting technologies that originate within me or in the ecosystem that I am able to create. That is the motivation. So this has nothing to do with peer recognition. Okay, so I think there is a big difference in this mental shift that is required. I think it's a necessary condition to be a faculty entrepreneur, because if recognition is not there, it can play in your brain in a variety of ways, especially if it fails.
Absolutely.
Right. So if it fails, then you are neither seen as you're seen as basically worthless in the setup, to put it bluntly. Okay. And that's something that you'll have to decide on what you want to do. I mean, nobody can say what you want to do, but to me, coming from the US back to India, it just and I'm in engineering. I'm not doing some fundamental stuff like physicists do. Okay. I use known physics and specific situations to build technologies, logic of techniques to exploit physics in a certain manner in control settings, right? So if I'm not doing something fundamental and I'm around engineering, it did not make sense to me that I would sit here and do the same things, let's say a faculty member in the US wants to do, publish in a certain set of journals or something like that. So I thought this path made a lot more sense to me very early on. That did not mean that I wanted to create a company. I wanted to say that I will focus on building technologies. It so happened I ended up creating a company because of a confluence of the set of people I worked with initially, and also just about keeping a group together. We had no clue that we'll be selling millions of controllers or anything like that. So I think this mental makeup is very important, and maybe I think it's possibly the most important point around faculty members becoming entrepreneurs or not. Do you have the mental makeup to look at wide deployment of in the real world? Because that's a very different journey from your own little cocoon of dealing with your peers.
Yeah, so that actually brings to the next question, that how did the laboratory environment, your students, co-workers at that point in time, who actually influenced you in some way, perhaps to take the plunge even in the entrepreneurship, actually take the technology on your own to the startup journey? What was the environment like at that point?
No,
and
I
how-
don't think they created the environment to do this. Maybe it's the other way around.
Okay.
See, I have always been a person. I mean, right from day one in IIT Bombay, I was very clear that, I mean, being in the professorial cocoon of having only dealing with other faculty members did not make any sense to me. Okay, or just students. I had to deal with the outside world for me to find out if I can be of relevance. So I would go out to industry and try and see what are the broad set of technologies the world is looking at, what makes sense for this industry, etc. I was doing that anyways. So I ran some industry relevant projects, one of them funded by the industry itself, one of them funded by the government. So I was outward looking always. And in fact, part of the reason why the set of people ended up working with me, the students I mentioned, but these are not the only students who I created the company with. I had lots of students at the point in time. Part of the attraction for them to come and work with me is because I was outward looking.
Right.
Okay. So the set of people who came and worked with me also had, I think they already had in them that I want to be able to do something where I'm directly relevant to the real world as opposed to being a cog in the wheel of a large enterprise. Okay, so that I think already had the ingredients, and I'm cocky guy, you know. I know that I'm good, and therefore I will go out and a bit of a go-getter, you know. So I think all of that put together led us to create a couple of prototypes, which typically does not get created in IIT labs at all. Okay, one thing very crucial to remember is that there are very many successful entrepreneurs who are IITians. Okay, of course, you can talk about the most well-known from IIT Bombay, maybe Nandan Nilekani or somebody like that, right? So they are all successful IITians. But you ask them, did the lab environment, did something they did in the lab lead to creation of whatever enterprise they did? No, that's not the case. So they were successful IITians. I mean, they had the IIT degree. Maybe the hostel environment led them to believe that they're really good. They had the gumption to go out and challenge the world or whatever it is. But the technical work being done in a lab leading to the creation of the company, I do not know that there are very many examples. Okay. So this is also an important point to register, that the lab itself was a very vibrant lab. We were exploring some cool problems, cool things to do. Some of it already been worked upon by other people, and we found some nuances. Some of it was just not worked upon by anybody else, because nobody looks at things carefully enough in our setting. You know, we just take something that is handed down from the West. You know, so that is the reality even today. So I think the lab environment was around me being outward looking, me being a little bit of a go-getter, the students already knowing that I was this sort of a person, and therefore being attracted towards it. And then, of course, we worked on, I mean, the attitude of the place is about, you know, a bit of no nonsense, just focus on whatever happens. No lying, no papers which claim something which doesn't happen. All of that was never there in my lab. You know,
Right.
if something works,
getting,
we say it works.
Right. No,
if it doesn't,
so
it doesn't.
Yeah. The point I was getting at is that, you know, getting those kind of students who buy into your ideology of doing things the way they are doing, particularly given their peer group also. Because you know, generally when they exchange notes, they should buy into this idea that I am in a professor's lab who is actually more outward looking than publish and perish type of a culture kind of a person, and they also
No,
buying into that ideology.
Students like that, you know. See, students don't, I mean, at least a reasonable number of them have less of a facade.
Okay.
See, professors have to protect an image, the image of, you know, you being some great researcher, you having some great ideas, great teacher. I mean, there are lots of images that you need to protect, because the respect from society comes from that. Students don't have so much of that. So in fact, they like people who are just saying that, you know, I'm going to try and change something around fuel injection in automotives. I mean, that was the first project that I did in 2004. So I think they like outward looking profs. They would like more of such outward looking profs. So I don't think that is a big challenge at all. Even today, if there is an outward looking prof, that person will attract a fair number of students. I'm pretty sure about that.
So then the next question normally is, normal, like first question was more like, did IIT play a role in this particular thing? But I will rephrase that and say that did being associated with IIT as a faculty member or coming from the IIT background as a BTech student yourself, did that help in the success of Sedemic in some way?
I don't think BTech student helps much in this whole journey. See, the IITs have, I mean, IIT Bombay especially have instituted a business incubator, which now you are professor in charge of. So there is a semblance of thinking that one of the things that the IITs has to do is to nurture businesses that come out of entities like faculty members or recent graduates. That thinking was already in place before I joined. Maybe it was nascent, but it was there. The thinking was there. So you didn't have to battle that, because doing business in India for a long time was thought of as nefarious, and that too a faculty member doing it, somehow you're making extra money or you're moonlighting, or also, I mean, there are all sorts of connotations associated with it. I don't think those connotations were so ripe in IIT Bombay. I think it's been a free place. But it is also that IITs typically, after creating a certain structure, they are passive. Okay, nobody has encouraged me to be an entrepreneur. Let me put it that way. Okay, no director really cares about it, except where if he has to tell something to the government. हमारे यहाँ पे भी there is a company, बोलने के लिए एक slide डाल देगा. Okay, and different directors have asked me for slides at different points in time. Okay, but beyond that, I think it's your journey. You do what you want, that sort of thing. Okay, so I don't think there is encouragement to in IIT to be faculty entrepreneurs like there is encouragement to publish. Okay, today there is encouragement. What is encouragement? Your promotions are linked to those things. So that is one form of encouragement. You're derided if you don't publish. You're derided if you don't teach well. Okay, so that's another form of saying that you should be these are things that you should be doing. Nobody is bothered whether you have a company or not. Okay, so in that sense, IIT Bombay is indifferent. That's the way it operates. But to your question about whether IIT association has helped me in my journey as an entrepreneur, the answer is yes. The answer is yes for maybe not the right reasons. Okay, the answer is yes because my company actually carries basic technologies. So it builds some basic technologies and carries it to potential large volume adopters. So when you are carrying a proposition that we are the first to do sensorless commutation for high torque, low speed applications, I mean, this sort of a statement is a very big statement, because what have the Siemens and ABB and Bosch and Continentals of the world done? And what is it? I mean, and electromagnetism is known for 150 years now as physics, and there are motors have been around for 120, 130 years. So what is it that you have done suddenly that other people could not do, who have poured billions into this thing, is a natural question. And if you want to cut through that, you need some pedigree. So I think the access to CTOs or decision makers in major companies, especially in India, becomes easier if you have a tag of an IIT prof. For the right or wrong reasons, they say, okay, at least let's have a meeting and see what this person says. So I think that way I have benefited from the fact that I'm an IIT prof. But beyond that, beyond the first meeting and first cup, you cannot bluff your way through 3 crore implementations, right? Stuff has to work. So, and this is not about papers, which, I mean, most papers are not reviewed carefully enough. We all know that. This stuff has to work day in and day out. So it does help to get the initial connects, but after that, it's really about some substance that follows up. The company also, not just you, it's not just one person talking, but the company being able to support long-term engineering development programs at their end, because they are going to invest a huge amount of money themselves in making the shift from whatever they are doing to what we are saying. So it requires conviction at their end, and we have been able to do that multiple times. So the IIT Prof tag does help in initial conversations. So to that extent, I would say IIT has helped. But really, on support is passive, and money is wise is too little for the sort of company that has gotten built. So I wouldn't say any hard cash support or any hard support even otherwise has come, but passive and sort of well-meaning. And nobody stopped me from doing whatever I'm doing. No usual random jealousy feelings or suddenly some director saying, oh, stop all this. All that has not happened.
So I think things are changing based on at least whatever I am seeing. I wish I could nugget your statement that we are not able to put big money. But I think slowly and surely success stories like yours actually will spur many people to actually put in the hard money at an early stage in the
No, I don't think the IITs or Science is expected to put hard money.
Yeah.
You know, why should they? I mean, there are people in the business for that. Okay. So I don't think IITs or Science should ever get into putting the real. You're not investors. Okay. You're
support wise, I'm talking about.
Yeah. What I think matters the most. See, I am a person who doesn't care about whether I am an assistant prof, associate prof, or a prof. Okay. I really don't care what people think about where I'm spending my time. I'm doing whatever I'm doing. If it's okay for IIT to continue with me, you continue with me. Otherwise, I'll find other things to do. And that's sort of a guy. Okay. But everybody may not have this thing. Okay. And it can, in fact, be a deterrent if the IIT system does not acknowledge this. Okay. Having 3 crore people write stuff is not a joke. Day in, day out. Okay. So it is something that's not even spoken about in the IIT system, right? So it's not as I have a grouse or anything again. I don't care actually whether IIT people speak about it or not. But for others, they may not have the same attitude. It may matter to them that, you know, I've done this hard work and I've something has come out of it, and nobody is really talking about it. Okay, which can be a real dampener. So I don't think IIT is doing enough in that dimension, but maybe they don't want to do enough. Maybe they don't want people like me either. Maybe they're happier people with publishing and teaching. That's also fine. So it all depends on what does IIT want to do. So if that answer is clear to the director and the council, that's fine.
So how do you juggle between the 2 roles now? Now, since we talked about IIT faculty, so as an entrepreneur who is leading
as the company has grown and there are many more things. I mean, we are talking about some serious money, you know, and all that. And then there are responsibilities, and I shepherd the company still. I'm not this passive guy who's just sitting somewhere. Though I don't do any day-to-day operations. I do take significant decisions. I'm involved in, you know, key matters of the company. Like an active director, you can call it. So what has happened is my time has also been sucked into by the needs of the company and what it is doing. I travel abroad quite often for the needs of the company, etc. So over a period of time, what has happened is what used to be my time to run, you know, sort of projects and stuff like that within my my set of labs that I used to be involved with, that has gone down. Okay, but my teaching, of course, has continued all the time. I teach very large classes, 150 plus students all the time. So that has continued, and I enjoy doing that. So I teach, and then I'm involved with this company. Okay, so I hardly do any research anymore. Okay, so that's the path I have taken, but that's something that not everybody will be comfortable with taking. So yeah. But that's the path I have taken.
No, that's very interesting, because you might have realized I have asked many questions from a faculty angle, and I'm sure there are many other questions which are there from the audience. So before I proceed with any of my questions, I thought in the interest of time, we'll take a few questions from the audience. Rakesh, can you
sure.
Can you see those questions and take them up?
Yeah. So we have a question from Professor Momaya. He wanted to ask this question at the start of the webinar. He's asking amazing inventions that you and your team are working on. There's still several big, there are still big voids in the electronics ecosystem which hamper development in the industry. Among several reasons, gaps in capabilities of our HR seems to be key. Any suggestions on bridging those voids is what he was asking.
No, really. This is a policy question. I mean, of course, I have opinions on many things, but Yeah, this entrepreneurship journey is not about solving policy issues. So don't really know how to answer that question.
Sure. So another question from Darshan Shah. He asks, you became a faculty member in 2004 and incubated in CERIMAC in 2008. How did you establish yourself in academia, especially doing experimental research and entrepreneurship so fast?
I never established myself. Nobody really knows me too well in academic circles. And I was never bothered about it because I was doing stuff around key problems. I don't care actually right now. If 3 crore people are using my stuff, it doesn't matter whether I'm established in academia or not. So it never bothered me to become anybody, you know, be an editorial board of some journal or anything like that. That was never my agenda. So I'm not in any ways a star researcher of any kind. So it has never bothered me. So I have not established myself in academia.
You've been humble, Professor Shashi.
No, that's the truth. So there is nothing to be humble about.
Yeah, but I think the takeaway from Shashi's thing is that for academic, like, motivation is completely different. And then the mindset that is required for entrepreneurship is very, very different. And it takes basically, very, very, like, guts. I wouldn't say guts, but like what straightforwardness, what Shashi says, that, yeah, I am a faculty, but I didn't establish myself as a great R&D person in my field. But he is an entrepreneur. So that's the difference that Shashi is trying to indicate here.
Yeah, one thing I would like to say is that the work done by me and my companies is nothing short of really cool. Okay. So does that lead to some 100 papers? No, I don't want 100 papers. Okay. I want a lot of people using my stuff. So whatever journey is required for that is what I went after. So it is not that quality of work was any lesser if I did not publish like crazy. Okay, there are a few patents, a few things. That's good enough, because ultimately the journey, and there are lots of things associated with that journey. If we really count the amount of carbon dioxide we have saved, is more than 1 billion kilograms. So this is scale implementation. So there will be lots of things that you didn't even ask for, which come to you, good and bad. And there are lots of good things as well. So though if those things satisfy you, then the journey is worth it. If those things don't satisfy you, somehow feel that, no, this great sheikh's man sitting somewhere in Delhi or in some university in the US, he has to say that you are a great guy. then that is not what I'm there for.
So Shashi, one question which I get while listening to your answer is that, see that kick that you did research to solve this kind of a problem and around which company is created. And does that, is that streak still on, wherein you look at the next problem?
No, less of that. So basically, like I told you, that streak, it kept going down depending on how much the company needed me. Okay. See, as an active director, right, it is not just technical stuff. Right? The most important thing about creating a long-term entity is about thinking about the institution. I'm creating a institution. Okay, a smallish institution is not a great institution or of any sort today. Maybe it will become, we do not know. Okay, but it is about creating an institution. So that for that, there are many things to think about, right? Which is not, many of it is non-technical. So that goes, and the CPU cycles go into that, definitely. Okay, so I do not know whether that journey is meant for all profs or whether any prof should be doing it. Okay, but this is what I have done.
Sure.
And it seems that if you don't do that, you will not be the faculty entrepreneur. You could be somebody who's supporting somebody else who's an entrepreneur, which is also great. Okay, but if you are an entrepreneur, you have to think through all this, because you're ultimately building an organization. It is not just solving some problem, and solving a problem doesn't mean that 3 crore people will use it. Okay, there is a lot in between that you have to put together. you have to get the buy-in of a lot of people, employees, customers, vendors, lot of things are going on there. So I do participate in critical matters related to that. So many of my thoughts are non-prof thoughts.
Sure.
To share it openly.
Shashi, like Rakesh, I'm jumping into it. Sorry, I will pass it to you. But there are a couple of questions which are very relevant for the audience viewpoint. So one question is that from deep tech startups, deep tech or strong tech to entrepreneurship, how did you build the journey? How did you build the business team in initial phase? And I think there is also similar question on founder, that at what point of time did you include or involve co-founders from a business or technical, non-technical background? So if you can answer these two questions, because founding.
So which one do you want me to? They are very different questions.
I think basically one is that how did you build it and what point of? So they are both.
No, so from day one, this company was founded by 4 people. It's not that I created it and then got them in. Okay, we co-created it. Of course, I was the lead founder. I continue to be the lead founder. Lead founder is basically I'm the face of the company. Somebody thinks SEDEMAC, they will think of me. Okay. That doesn't mean that other people are not the face of the company, but I'm the lead founder. Okay, so it's always been that we 4 created it. One of them has moved on, but the 3 of us continue to work with each other. And regarding this deep tech, I mean, I didn't understand that question. What was the question?
No, question was that to build a strong tech company, you build some tech in your lab and then you spun out as an entrepreneurship. How did you build a business team around? And the
see, this business bit, right? See, first of all, the most difficult part is actually building some world-class technology. Most people fail there. Okay, because it is very hard to say that this is the best in the world around money making, right? Once money making is there, lots of smart people have looked at motor and motor controls, right? So the toughest part is to actually have something that is world class. The most people do not have the honesty to accept that their stuff is not world class, or it may not be the first in the world. It may be 10th in the world, or it may be some small modification of somebody else that is somebody else has done. So I find that that is the most important thing. If it is indeed world class, is number one. Second is that you may do something, but it still may not be useful because of the time in which it came. Right? You have an offering which is not at the right time, at the right place. Okay, not at the right geography. There may be lots of reasons for why something does not take off. There, I think you have to have the sort of business sense to understand what sort of propositions will work in what markets. Okay, so I think the 4 of us, and definitely me too, we are smart people in terms of understanding what markets want. Okay, and now I can say that I'm smart. At that time I didn't know that I was smart. So basically I look around and I'm a little honest about what the market wants. Some markets are not ready for certain things. For example, I don't think this company could have existed in Botswana, right? Because it's not easy to go and find big deployers. This company maybe could have existed in the US, but it is very difficult for this company to exist in many parts of the world. You need some big markets, big deployers, those sort of things. That those ingredients exist in India also. Not the best ingredients, but they do exist in India. That has helped. So deep tech is mainly about, do you really have something deep first? And secondly, whether you understand markets. This business team is emphasized too much. Okay, if the entrepreneurs are themselves smart, the business team will build around it. Come on, business is I mean, being able to sell something is more about understanding who else can give what other propositions rather than really knowing what you're building. So sales is made too much out of in deep tech companies, according to me, because it is finally sold on the strength of the technology.
Sure. Thanks, Professor Shashi. We have a question from Professor Rohan Chinchwadkar. So he's asking if you could share your journey in terms of your funding and kind of how did you approach investors?
Yeah, see that is one puzzle that you have to be lucky at the same time savvy to solve. All the founders of this company came from middle or upper middle class backgrounds, including me. My father was in a bank. My mother was a teacher. My whole family is full of teachers. So none of us have, and there are other founders also, similar sort of backgrounds. So no real capital to start with, right? So this company has raised about 100 crores of equity capital so far. So 100 crores is a very large sum of money by most stretches of imagination of IIT profs. 100 crores into a private enterprise, not somebody funding some solar program or something like that. So we could not have built a technology or a product company without investment. Okay, this is a very important thing to understand. Services, you are already on day one, you have something to offer to somebody, some consulting or something like that. There you can build a company with very little capital. But if you want product and technology building, you have to put all your money up front, and there is a risk of it going nowhere, etc. That sort of thing requires capital. Okay, so I got fortunate that the first set of investors that I interacted with, they were always open to listening to the story. I think the main thing is that the level of deployment possible of our technologies has always been very large. So then investors get excited. It is not some niche thing. Okay. So maybe I got lucky as well, because I was trying to raise money at the same time there was Ola and there was Flipkart. And these are the sort of companies investors were investing in. They don't care where they put the money, right? As long as they get more money out of it. So it's very hard to find investors who want to actually back technology ventures, because that's not their job. There is money in, money out, more money out than money in. That's about it. So it's always been difficult in India to raise capital for these sort of ventures, because there is no faith that first time in the world technologies actually get built by Indian engineers. Even now, nobody believes it. Most people in this group also will not believe that. So it is always difficult to raise capital in this thing. So you have to be a little lucky, little savvy, find somebody who's willing to back you. And you don't need a whole lot of backers. You need 4 or 5 people. So the whole world doesn't have to agree to what you're saying. Just 4 or 5 people at different points in time is good enough for this sort of a journey. Now, if you have some other glorious journey where you need thousands of crores of investment for some crazy technology, which is very rare, then maybe you need a lot more investment backing. But we got lucky at the right time early on. Somebody gave me 2 crores by just looking at my face. So that got me going. And then over a period of time, as we built some success, etc., we got more equity fund.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. We have a question from Professor Sheshu. He's asking, what is the growing, with the growing emphasis on EVs, what is company's strategy going forward?
Motor controllers are necessary for EVs. So we are smack in the middle of all this. Right. So it's good. If electrification happens, the company will do well, better than what it is doing now.
Sure.
So I don't think people have registered that this company is heavily right now about motor controllers. Okay, so that is a very central part of electrification.
There are more questions, but we are also running out of time.
Yeah, so it's your choice. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 more and then finish.
Rakesh, take just 1 or 2 and then we can finish.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll take this question from Nilesh. He asks, sir, your company team has many IIT Bombay PhDs, and he asks, what attitude?
No, we don't have many IIT Bombay PhDs. We have several IIT Bombay PhDs, many IIT Bombay and IIT Madras masters, dual degree as well as masters.
Okay.
PhD, I mean, there are 3.
Okay. He asks, what attitude do you wish our students should possess when who have a belief in their ideas and want to get into entrepreneurship in the future?
I don't understand. What is the question?
In terms of, is it a risk-taking attitude, or what is the attitude that you wish the students should have?
To do what?
To take
It is from a PhD student perspective, if I can jump in and ask. See, you have talked from a faculty perspective. If there is a PhD student and working in a research problem, maybe professor is not maybe willing to take up that kind of entrepreneurial leap. So what attributes PhD student have to take the plunge in
PhD is
entrepreneurship?
about looking at a problem carefully enough over a period of time so that you become an expert at it and come up with a couple of ideas that the world can say, hey, this is good to look at a little more carefully, right? That's what the PhD journey really is about. Okay, and in the process you become a bit of a doctor of philosophy of that thing, right? You learn a lot about many things, the cross connections. You become mature, how you start understanding that it is very hard to actually make a fundamental contribution. You become a mature researcher, basically. Now, that has nothing to do with entrepreneurship. That's more a sort of an academic journey, right? So what should a person do to become an entrepreneur, etc.? I mean, there is no formula to it, right? So if you feel that you have a set of ideas around which an enterprise can be built, okay, or a set of ideas around which a product or a service can be offered to the market. If you feel that way, then you jump into it, whether or not your professor does anything.
So Shashi, before we close, I have one question around IP, because that is quite relevant for faculty members who are doing collaborative research. Now you have, when you do collaborative research, especially or development, your funding comes from either government resources or corporate entity. Yeah. Government is like initially all is IP is owned by government and all those things, but I think they are also putting policy around that. It is now left to the academia. How do they do around it? But in case of industry, there is always much pressure to for IP ownership in favor of like industry. When you were dealing with industry, and I believe you also have collaborative agreements or developmental activity with industry, how did you negotiate IP so that it remained pretty much under your control to decide?
See, first of all, one shouldn't be too worried about IP. Okay, so the long-term sustenance about an idea is actually not dependent on one particular IP. Okay, so for example, I mean, the couple of projects that I ran in 2004 to 2008 that I said, one was funded by the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office, and they were linked to TIFAC, and TIFAC then passed on the IP to IIT Bombay. Like everybody else, they sat on it, even though it was an IIT Bombay prof who was heading it at that point in time. But they finally gave it to IIT Bombay, and then IIT Bombay had through sign, etc., an arrangement that this company can use it. Okay, so that is the normal route. So you have to be after people, say, why are you not doing it? That sort of thing. You write some emails here and there, and hope that they do it. With the industry, I think it's a little more straightforward. See, industry is about putting in money, making money, etc., that sort of thing. More straightforward in the sense that you can have a discussion saying, if I'm doing something, there should be something in it for me. So typically IIT Bombay wants to tell its industry participants, this is the typical narrative that, for a certain period of time, it will be the guy who funded it. And after a while, if you have not taken it forward, then IIT Bombay can go and give it to other people. This is what IIT Bombay will tell them. And they will say, bugger off. So because I have put in the money, I have taken the risk. Okay. All companies are like that. In general, if I have taken the risk of supporting a project, companies, what do they do with employees? They don't like employees going and using their IP with somebody else, right? They're paying them. So similarly, they think that if I pay, then it belongs to me, right? So this is a normal thing everywhere in the world. If you pay, it belongs to you, right? So there is no one answer on how to deal with it. You need to have the maturity, first of all, to understand that don't get too caught up on any one IP and all that. Okay. The real smarts is about you having the technical breadth and the technical depth to build lots of different things at different points in time, depending on what the market needs. Okay. If you have that gumption, then one particular IP, etc. Okay, if it doesn't come your way, it's okay. Yeah, you find your way through something else. Now, if it's super critical that IP is indeed going to create the next big Google or whatever PageRank algorithm or whatever it is, then you have to make sure that you have a setup. And I think IIT Bombay already has a pretty decent setup. You can at least the Dean R&D at Kurian Isaac or whoever it was. I mean, I think Kriti Ramamritam, etc. I mean, so it was not difficult to deal with them at all. No? So it was fairly straightforward. That this is what I wanted to do, and for this transfer of IP will be useful. Not that IP came and changed my game, but it is useful to give some credibility to get going. But the main thing I think I want to point out is that no one IP actually will lead to the creation of technology. So it's a combination of multiple things. Okay, so it's okay if you make an attempt to get the IP into the company through some commercial arrangement, either in your case, Sign took some equity from me or whatever it is. That is a straightforward manner, or a revenue share mechanism, or whatever it is. You can arrive at a certain mechanism, which works for people, and ultimately people want it to work out, right? IIT Bombay is not so bothered about the money making. They want things to work out so that they can put it in their bullet item that company from Sign is doing it, like you guys are doing 18,000 crore or whatever it is. It'll be flashed everywhere. So like that. Somewhere that IP, so much technology transfer happened, etc. That bullet point is important for them as well. So I think overall it is supportive, is my experience, and one shouldn't get too worked up if something is not working. You keep working on your company and building your technologies, and if it comes your way, then you start using that openly. That's about it.
We still have some questions unanswered, but I think we need to close. We are already 5:10 right now. Yeah, so Rakesh, over to you.
Yeah, there are some more questions on exit strategy and all of that, but we will, because of interest of time, we will close now. Thank you so much, Professor Shashi and Professor Karpare, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shashi.
Bye.
Yeah. And we'll be having more such webinars where we'll be having more faculty members who've been entrepreneurs, will be speaking to us, so that the more faculty members will be inspired to form companies.
Okay, hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, audience, for joining us.
Thank you.